Bernard, welcome back. Glad to have you back on the program. Founder of Clearscope. We had a great first episode, so figured, hey, we got a local. We should have him on and talk the evolving state of search.
Well, thank you so much for having me again, Ross. It's always really good to catch up, share notes, trade information, since the industry is rapidly evolving.
It hasn't changed at all since the last time we talked.
Not at all.
It is kind of an interesting, I feel like almost the trope in SEO is that it's the same for a while. For a while, I think people said, it's content. You could say, hey, how did you rank? Is it this optimizing around this algorithm? No, it's content and links. And then, but I do feel it's actually changing now. And maybe all that kind of, what's the word? Ego around lack of change finally caught up to us. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think that's been an observation that people have called out, but relatively calm waters within SEO from something like 2011 to 2020, right? That period where the playbook was very defined, right? You built links, you had comprehensive content, and you generally ranked. And I think that over the last 2 to 3 years, we've really seen a big shakeup in terms of people not getting the results that they typically got using the traditional playbook.
Yeah, makes sense. As part of that, not just how things have changed. You have amazing tool. I don't think last time I let you or aptly described what Clearscope does. Very strong SEO content optimization tool. I'll let you frame. How would you frame the tool before it leads into my question?
Yeah. In the simplest way possible, we help content creators create comprehensive content. In more advanced language, we use, entity recognition, that's natural language processing, using Google Cloud, OpenAI, IBM Watson to identify key concepts that surround any given topic. What we now know with, Google Leaks, API documentation and all of that is that this idea of semantic SEO, as evaluated through Google's knowledge graph and, checking to see whether or not content is covering known entities is something that Google does do. And, that's essentially why optimizing or including as many entities within a body of content gives Google more confidence that your content is likely to meet searcher needs and therefore gets better ranking and better traffic.
Agreed, and love the tool, especially in kind of niche jargon-filled industries where those things are most easy to miss, in my opinion. So we're always using it and recommending it. And this is not just plug for your tool, but I was curious. And I figured this would be helpful in the context of SEO world. It's not just ask vaguely, where is this world going? But rather, where are we putting our money where our mouth is in terms of where this thing is going, where SEO is going. So that hearing you describe the tool, I think it'd be helpful for people, myself, and others to hear, and happy to share our side as well. What's the roadmap look like? Obviously, things have changed already so much, but and maybe that's worth commenting on as well, how you changed a little bit based on that. But where you're going as well to think through or anticipate where that next step might be.
Yeah, I think this is a topic of many discussions within SEO these days. And, I think there's a variety of ways that we could look at it. One of the ways that I continue to think about, and this is more of a hypothesis on the future of SEO, is this fact that AI overviews is being released in, incognito searches, right? You don't have to be logged in. Google obviously has tried really hard to release it. They got, a lot of pushback from the negativity of their experimental, stuff. They since rolled it back significantly, and now they're kind of on the cusp of re-rolling it out. I think the most interesting part about what is happening in search is this distinction that's happening between the AI overview / featured snippet and the actual search engine results page that lives below the AI overview / featured snippet.
Right.
I think the observation from the community, most prominently, this is like Mike King, is that, he's seeing that AI overviews are being generated from any piece of content in the top 100 results, regardless of, where the position is. It seems to look at a small, like paragraph by paragraph, analysis to understand how semantically rich that passage is. And that then ends up being selected as some of the answers to the AI overviews.
Did you see, not to interrupt you, I just saw this week on Search Engine Land that it might have been a recent change that AI overviews are now getting pulled from the top 10. Someone said 99.5% of the time.
Oh, okay.
Like pretty significant change.
That's a huge change.
But I agree. I saw it like that. And then I saw that change. I was like, that's pretty dramatic.
That is actually very dramatic, and therefore making the AI overview actually more close to a featured snippet, because that was like the featured snippet requirement in the past.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if that is,
we're changing the roadmap already.
No, yeah, exactly. It's all changing, and so however AI overviews shake out, it does appear to be a significantly different algorithm. Well, was a significantly different algorithm that prioritized entity-rich passages. So the going hypothesis that I hold, and we'll see if it actually ends up shaking out, is that the AI overview and featured snippet is a completely different algorithm than the SERP. And what I think we're starting to see is this idea that you are optimizing for two different outcomes, right? Number one is if you produce a very entity-rich short-form passage, then you actually have more grounds to qualify for the AI overview. And I think this, when I've tested this, you can, Google what is X, and generally that will flag an AI overview. And when you take the AI overview text and you run that through Google's own natural language processing to understand the entities, you'll actually see the ratio of entities to normal words or stop words within AI overviews is significantly dense, right? It's when I do what is UGC? They'll be user-generated content is, content created by users, customers, target audience, right? It's stitched together from this entity combination that Google has basically, I think, built a knowledge graph around. And basically, the more entities you can stuff into, a short form passage on the given topic, the more likely that it's going to, in my words, tickle the machine learning's fancy, because they're oh wow, this looks so rich, right? It's got all of these different entities surrounding it. So I think we're starting to see this this distinction where optimizing for an AI overview is then, centered around specific query types that are generally higher consensus as a query. So, the what is, those types of things, right? A lot of us all generally agree user-generated content is something, and it's all very tightly correlated. And so I think AI overviews featured snippets are then looking at entity-rich passages that basically cram as much density of knowledge graph to tickle Google's fancy. And then I think the rest of the search engine results page is then governed by user engagement signal, which is a completely different, model.
Makes sense. I've seen blends. You triggered a few thoughts or reminders that I have that I used to track to, and I mean, whether it's AI overviews or not, I'm curious your thoughts on them. I think it was AI. It was like a voice search thing when everyone was like on that.
Oh yeah,
for
right.
for a half second.
Yeah, when voice search was like this is gonna kill search or something.
Yeah. And part of I heard someone who did a study of that. There was something to just like maybe document length isn't the word, but like sentence length, like the briefer the term, the phrase, the more likely it would be kind of said. Which maybe sort of reflects a little bit. I'm not sure if that factors in AI overviews or not, but it was a general guidance we gave our team of like, if you are doing that exact definition of what is UGC, you would say UGC is X, and you ideally do it in the most brief fashion you can while still retaining the meaning.
Yes, and cram it full of as many entities.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. I think that's it.
So just out of curiosity, is what you're getting at specific to Clearscope? There may be a way to measure just like on a sentence basis eventually, or I'm not sure if this already exists in the product.
Yeah. I mean, in Clearscope world, we call it the A+++. Essentially, it's like, how do you cram as many entities into as short of a paragraph as possible that like still holds like coherency, right?
Makes sense.
And so we've been testing this as a pure hypothesis to say, okay, winning an AI overview citation, if you will, is a much different part of optimization compared to winning a SERP, like classic blue link. And I think that it makes complete sense given that, the AI overview can only, really briefly answer very specific things, that it's going to look for different
brevity. Also.
Exactly. Brevity, entity-rich comprehension. Whereas, the blue link, now we know nav boost, glue, all these user engagement signal stuff is like by far, one of the most important factors of, what contributes the blue link ranking.
Makes sense. So that seems like a big thing. Is that kind of the core current top of mind thing you're kind of directionally going to, or is there anything else on the roadmap worth noting?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of there's a lot of things. There's just so much. There's so much. So I think that gets us into, again, there's a variety of ways to address and think about this. It's like, okay, where is search going? What's the evidence that, we see? And I think AI overviews being a separate model compared to SERPs is a trend that, we're seeing. I think another way to then think about another trend is this idea of, what are language models actually good for? And, how is search behavior changing? And essentially, I think one of the most interesting parts about large language models, obviously the dominant one is GPT, is that it finally introduces a technology layer in computer science where you can give the model something fuzzy, and the model will return something fuzzy back. So I'm trying to speak now in like computer science terms, right? So in computer science terms, it's very, if you've studied it or if you haven't, basically everything is binary, right? It's true or false, right? Like the code works or it doesn't work. And essentially in the past, the languages are very rigid, right? You have to run an algorithm, and basically it spits back, 0 or 1, and anything in between, like 0.2, 0.5, whatever. But generally your expected outcome is a 0 or a 1. With large language model technology, all of a sudden you actually get this technology from a computer science perspective that can output gray instead of white and black.
Yeah.
And that is actually so significant. I think that's why a lot of people, when they say, oh, like the AI wave is here, I think that, this is, one very significant part about it. And so, from a Clearscope perspective, what we found that we can do is that we can actually feed web pages to Claude or GPT, and we can ask the LLM, what is this content type? And Claude is actually really good. They can say, oh, like given the contents of this page and the title tag, like this is a landing page, or this is a product description on an e-commerce, or this is an informational blog article. Same thing with OpenAI. Actually, Claude has tested better when we've done this. And so you can start to imagine, like, in the past, there wasn't commercially available technology where you could feed a web page to a classifier and have it, output something that's like remotely accurate. But now we're looking at this and, I would say it's like 90% accurate. I mean, yeah, 10% of the time it comes out with jarbled like junk or whatever, but it's actually surprisingly good. And so, the extensions of this are infinite, right? Because all of a sudden, a lot of things that literally you had to code right, you can now just get blurry like sorts of responses from. So, good examples are that we can like take all of the web pages in the top 30 results and we can say, okay, given, all of these embeddings, like what about this topic isn't being discussed, right?
Yeah.
In the top 30. And, the language model can look at all the documents and say, okay, if you're talking about user-generated content, you are, no one talks about artificial intelligence. And that's huge. Like in the past, you could not do that.
Oh, I love that. So this is like teeing up a question I had thought about already. Is this kind of directionally going towards the concept of information gain and how you're thinking about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that gets us to, this crazy sort of analysis to then say, okay, well, let's think about SEO, but let's think about it from Google's point of view, right? I think a lot of people get really, hot-headed when they're like, oh my God, Google just screwed over my website. I'm not ranking anymore. Like I produce great quality content. Google sucks. Screw Google. Google webmaster team is just making lots of mistakes. And that I get, obviously it sucks to be a small publisher in today's Google's like algorithm. But put it in another way, like what if we pretend we are Google, right? And if we think about if we're Google, we have a massive problem on our hands, right? Basically, before 2021, content largely was, I would say, kind of being produced at a fairly like linear rate that was like, incrementally increasing.
Yeah. But
with the advent of large language model technology, you now all of a sudden have the era of infinite content, right? Where now instead of a linear capacity, content is being produced, in an exponential capacity. So that brings us to, okay, if we're Google, how are we going to know of, maybe in the past it was 100 documents being produced for a given topic, every month on average, to 10,000, right? Like all of a sudden, this increase of commodity Me Too content is like exploding. And we have a really difficult problem on our hands to say, of the new content that's entering the ecosystem for a given topic, how do we select a piece of content that's actually worth giving to our users?
You just triggered a pattern I've been seeing. I feel like they've been more temperamental around date displays on search result. When you actually make an update, is it passing a threshold of warranting displaying that date?
Yes.
Even if it's not like manipulative, if it's still like, maybe it's a 1-2% change. They're not showing it. And I haven't always tracked like how long they're showing it, but I could see how it could tie to that concept.
Yes.
Where you'd think a lot of manipulation would be happening on recency or recently published content, hypothetically, that they would want to soften.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, that is that, we were just talking about new content. Now we're also talking about the existing ecosystem of content that is already ranking. And so when you think about that problem, Google has a really difficult problem on its hands, right? It's almost an infinitely complex problem to solve because the content that continues to be produced is infinitely variable in terms of, what's happening. So that brings us to, I've been, I think, pretty vocal about it, but the concept that, Bill Slawski first talked about, then has, gathered a lot of traction lately is information gain, right? And, I think Google, well, first, a brief definition of information gain, right? It's, I think, in looking at the patent, it's the amount of new information that's provided by a subsequent set of documents given a first document. So trying to dumb that down, you have document A, and it talks about, user-generated content. And then you have document B, where it talks about, say, user-generated content and Reddit and Quora. And then you have document C, and let's say it talks about user-generated content and, SEO and artificial intelligence. So if document A contains Quora and Reddit in its, body, then we could say that document B, right, again, that just solely talked about Quora and Reddit, is contributing 0 information gain, right?
Okay,
because,
yes,
the delta between the entities being discussed is 0, if not negative.
Right.
So document A then is superior to document B. However, right, if document A does not talk about SEO and artificial intelligence, then document C is contributing new information for the topic, again, from an entity perspective. So, from Google's point of view, if they're looking at all this content that has already existed, those are all say document A. And then they're looking at the new flood of content entering the ecosystem, then those are documents, say, B and C. So they're going to look at B and say, okay, well, yeah, we already know that UGC is closely related to Reddit and Quora. That's what document A says. So 0 points of information gain.
Right.
They'll look at document C and say, oh, this one's new. This one's interesting. It's actually contributing where the topic is evolving. So that's plus, we'll call it 5 points in terms of information gain. And then they'll look across the entire, rest of the however many documents are entering the ecosystem. Each one will have a different score. And then they'll say, okay, let's choose the one with the best score. The best is, I do air quote, Ross can see me. But it's what does that mean, right? And I think that domain authority, topical authority are at play. I think there's a lot of different things that contribute to this score because I can't just write anything about anything and have Google look at, a piece of content I write about blockchain in relation to UGC and have Google say, wow, this is plus 500 points, right? That's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
So there's something to do with in Google leaks
parlance
state. Yeah, it's site focus score, site radius, topical knowledge graph, right? Where Google has some semblance that UGC is loosely connected to artificial intelligence and SEO already. They have some semblance of confidence that you are, worthy or topically authoritative enough to contribute to
this concept,
the concept of where this topic is likely to evolve towards. And that arrives at, some concrete information gain that then Google can then say, okay, Clearscope is in SEO and content. They have enough authority to qualify, to influence, right, where this topic is potentially evolving, and then we will serve that result and use user engagement signal to confirm or deny whether or not that is actually valid.
So from a Clearscope standpoint, and correct me if I'm wrong, today, a lot of it's co-occurrence of SEO tools. Clearscope should be mentioned on that. If not, that's problematic. in a world of information gain being increasingly important, is where you're getting, is it like, how does this, or can it possibly be translated in your kind of tool? Are you doing that in all? Like you're saying, is there almost, I'm speaking for you, but I almost imagine like, which actually goes back to some of our best practice in some ways, is there some threshold of being A+ similarity is actually not A+ at all. Therefore you should be A- to be A+. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still working
Noodling on
through
it.
a lot of these concepts in my mind. So, I think, another kind of related concept is this idea of consensus, right? And consensus is, best described through an example like lyrics, right? Like, so if we're Googling for, Taylor Swift lyrics for, one of her recent songs, pretty much every single website is going to say almost the same thing. So in that case, I think we could argue that, that SERP has a high amount of consensus. And Google knows that because they'll look at all the entities in the top, 10, 20, 30 results, overlay them on top of one another and say, okay, the footprint of this as a topic doesn't very much so deviate. And we know that this footprint is good because when we serve the search engine results page with, let's say these 10 results where the footprints don't deviate very much, the users are satisfaction is high.
Yeah.
So Google could then take that like model and say, yes, when we see that satisfaction is high, yet there is little deviation, and that actually merits an AI overview in a featured snippet, right? And so that's where I see this distinction between the two algorithms, starting to take shape, right? If satisfaction is really high for a grouping of searches on a topic that everybody all mostly says is the same, Google's just going to cannibalize that.
Makes sense.
Google's going to say, this is not original. They're going to, they've had this concept of originality. And I think that originality is actually measured by consensus, right? If everybody all agrees, your content, like from an entity perspective, your content's not original.
Makes sense.
And so that's this right. That's why I keep seeing this. But consensus is only really good for certain classes of queries. Right. So you can imagine, somebody's going to say, okay, why is SEO, going to die, or SEO is going to die? If somebody searches that, Google is going to, construct search engine results pages. And it's a very high likelihood that the footprints of all of these different entities are going to be way more scattered, right? Because you might argue SEO is not going to die. It's just here to change. Whereas, I might argue that, this is all theoretical, but I might argue that it is going to die, right? And Google is going to say, okay, well, when we display everything that says SEO is going to die, not good satisfaction. And so let's introduce other perspectives. And some of them will be like, oh, SEO is going to die. And then when they serve it as, like say 30% it's going to die, 30% it's not going to die, and 30%, like it's just going to change or whatever. Yeah. Then they say, okay, this produces the best satisfaction. So, then
we shouldn't have an overview.
Exactly.
Hypothetically, in that situation,
we shouldn't have an overview, or maybe we'll try an overview that answers, what is the future of SEO, and then we'll see how that affects how people interact with the rest of the SERP.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch for sure. I mean, on the how we're thinking about it is. Around the idea of information gain. It's something we like stopped doing outreach for a pretty long time.
Yeah.
Or not stopped doing it, but we did a whole lot less of it.
Mm-hmm.
And a realization I had in seeing a very good case study across our clients is that like a few samples, the performance of those who were referencing their first party data across all of their SEO content, not just like a link bait asset they made, but all of their SEO content was like extremely higher than those that did not.
Mm-hmm.
And it just gave me the aha that not only can you build like a big data report, and this is probably obvious in retrospect, but why shouldn't we be repurposing this novel to us information across as much of our content as possible?
Yeah.
Across the site. And we're calling that product-led digital PR. But and also hopefully it's more tied into product so you can be referencing this unique information, gaining data more presently on these concepts. Of course, that is not the idea of we're talking about UGC and we're supposed to say AI, but naturally probably we're doing a trends report. We're probably talking about AI maybe, and maybe we're tying that in. I'm not sure, but that's sort of how we're thinking about it.
Yeah. And I think that absolutely makes sense. It absolutely does. I think there's other theories that I have, right? Google and both OpenAI have a strong partnership with Reddit, paying them like $60 million a year.
Yeah.
And, there's this huge presence of Reddit and, forums that have been rising the ranks in Google search. And I actually think that the way that I think there's like two big factors here. It's like, number one, Google, from say 2010 to 2020 really pushed SEO content creators into a very specific templatized model of best practices.
Yeah.
And for the most part, what that rewarded was the skyscraper technique, backlinko, more comprehensive, more fleshed out ultimate guides. And basically that's, kind of the state of where we went into in early 2021. And a lot of people were disgruntled with the search engine results. So to a degree, Google has basically created its own big problem, right? In that a lot of people are like, well, this type of content doesn't exude experience, expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. This is why, I need to go and append Reddit to my queries. Yeah. And, I want the real stuff that people are like talking about. And, up until GPT released, like Chat GPT most specifically, Google could care less because they were a monopoly in search, and you literally couldn't do anything, and there was no alternative. Well, ChatGPT in a lot of ways like lit a fire right under Google's butt, and it's like, okay, well now there is this alternative, and if you don't get your search results better, then people are going to stop searching, and being going from like, I don't know, 1% or 2% to like 4% is like, okay, like we got to put a stop to that.
Yeah.
And so, Google starts then saying, okay, well then, how do we encourage the right kind of content to be produced that's original and unique? And so that's why this idea of originality, I think, Kevin Indig-Hurst popularized it in my mind, but he, there's that announcement where like Google's like, oh, we're going to reduce unoriginal content by 40%. And so that does allude to the idea that Google knows what 100% unoriginal content is, and they also know what 20% is. And so that got me thinking about the whole idea of like consensus and, and information gain and entity contribution or topical evolution.
Right.
And so I think that, this is all a long-winded way of saying that Google is partnering with Reddit, and communities are oftentimes the fastest ways to understand topical drift, right? Because if we're talking about, say, like stocks, and you go to Wall Street Bets or whatever, everyone's going to be like, oh my God, Jensen, like NVIDIA, like whatever. And what they can do is they have a direct access to all of that data,
Spigot,
right? A UGC that is happening, and they'll say stocks, NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And they'll connect it all. And then they'll say, okay, well then if any new piece of content is published around stocks, then, like NVIDIA, Jensen, they can develop these very loose blueprints using Reddit discussions as a way to understand likely developmental paths of topical evolution and use that to shortcut, this like huge triage process of say 10,000 new articles entering each second even, right, about stocks or any given topic, right? So Google needs to have definitive sources that they can like rely on to build the blueprints of logical information gain steps, because they can't just link any two concepts together from any blog. It needs to have some sort of a trust or like weight. So the idea is that, Reddit is currently that because Google literally has nowhere else to look. And so that's sort of this like idea that I'm also like playing around with. So, I'll go to r/SEO. I'll then take all of the, top posts. I'll run them through Google natural language processing. And then there's really cool stuff you can do with language models where after you get the response of the entities from Google Cloud natural language processing, you can actually ask GPT, Gemini, and Claude to build you a knowledge graph given all of the different entities that were returned. Yes. And then you can then start to say, okay, like highlight the nodes where more than 5 entities are connected and, map, show me, the core central. Like,
this is making me optimistic a little bit, actually. It's like there's a pessimism of Reddit's in the search results, but you're almost, this seems like it would drive better non-Reddit results via Reddit indirectly if what you're saying is how you think Google is thinking about it. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think literally it's the same way to think about it as like video carousels and those the featured perspective stuff. It's not like the forums are always position 1 or 2. They're for some queries you see Reddit show up as position 2, 3, 6. I literally think the positioning of that block, the discussions like featured or a snippet or rich result or whatever, is Google's approximation of like how little or much they believe that particular topic is suffering from non-information gain content. The higher up that discussion board is, the more Google is saying this as a topic doesn't have enough worthy content that lives in the SERP.
Is that action item if that's true, is the action item for content creators and SEOs that they would start from discerning what's currently being discussed in that Reddit block?
That's right.
To consider for their own.
Yes. So then you would take that, you would click on, usually in that there might be 3, sometimes there's like 5 if they're not like actually the cards that come out. And you would use essentially natural language processing on those questions and answers to infer the entity drift that Google is like maybe wanting for the topic. And then you would produce content that basically matches that entity drift and then assume that that's contributing the correct information gain to the topic.
Yeah, it's like a level C thinking. Our previous permutation or like consideration set is similar to what you said. Is you look at the SERP and the order of events on that SERP informs how we should create our content. Is there video? If there's photos above the fold, we better have a hell of a lot of high quality photos.
Yes.
If there's videos above the fold, we better do the same.
Right.
If it's at the very bottom, you might be able to get away with that not having one. Yeah. But in the context of forums in SERP, it's not you need to be a forum. It's just not that being a forum would necessarily be bad.
Right.
But there's discernment to be had about the things being said here that can inform our articles. Does that sound right to you?
That is absolutely it. And that's why, when if you were playing around with AI overviews in the experimental labs like format.
Yes.
Like, pizza would be, or cheese would be sticked to pizza through glue from Reddit, right?
Yes,
like that came from Reddit. So Google literally, I think, was like, okay, well, let's try to do this, with high temperature. Like first with our AI overviews, high temperature is this like saying in large language models where, you don't need as much reinforced training data to basically select an output.
Something. Okay.
Right. So low temperature means do not deviate, like be very confident in your probability that this answer is
Okay.
correct. High temperature means that like, okay, like maybe one data point said it and we can like allow ourselves to choose that particular thing. So it's clear that, I think Google is looking at all of this stuff that's going on and say we have a big confidence problem. And, like currently Reddit is a treasure trove of unique and vetted, data. And we're going to rely on that as the way to think about, right, how topics are like evolving. Now, because they've done that, they've essentially polluted like Reddit, right, where there's a lot more bots and, people are like, oh, well, let me just, like answer stuff, ask questions.
Who's the best SEO content tool? I'll
Right.
jump in there for you.
Exactly. I'll ask it on, a high karma account, answer it on another high karma account with another bot, whatever, right? So essentially, Reddit has to deal with a bunch of like issues now, but I think it's because Google is saying, okay, this is as good of a treasure trove of data as we're going to get. So we're going to use this. We're going to encourage, and then we're going to use Google propaganda. The whole EEAT, this got to be experience rich, because like the mentions of EEAT in the Google Leaks API were non-existent. Why? Because EEAT is literally Google saying, we don't know what users like. We like as like a objective sense. And our model is so heavily dependent upon user engagement signal. And what we know, correlates with positive outcomes for our users is content that exudes experience, expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. So Google is literally saying, a lot of what goes on in the top 1 to 2 pages of Google is all user engagement signal derived. And, how do we produce the best, SERP that is like positive in terms of user engagement? Like, okay, it's probably EEAT. But we also need to know that, where a topic is going and like serve the content that. So you have information gain, you have user engagement signal, and then you have, I think, something akin to authority, which is a combination of like backlinks, topical authority that then all like kind of go into the calculation of what Google wants to see.
In my original analysis of Reddit, and maybe I just need to check in on my pattern matching here, I noticed a lot of the results were quite old, actually.
Yeah.
They were like 2 years old, 1 year old. And I could see how that would be like an anti-manipulation consideration.
Right.
I haven't checked that as recently. I'm curious how that checks in. If you've seen different, how that would check in with your idea of like the topical evolution a little bit. I am definitely concerned of like, there's as to your point of manipulation, this was like a good short-term solution.
Yeah.
But what does it look like long-term?
Mm-hmm.
If that original age thing stayed consistent, but it's somewhat I'm sure it's probably SERP dependent, but any reaction to any of that?
I think it's a really good observation. If I were to guess, I would think that it's the Google team putting in anti-spam measures.
Okay.
So that's why a lot of
the age you're saying.
On the age, yeah. They'll say, oh, this is, 1 year ago. Because they're literally using that as like the kind of the answer. And then I think that
high CPC times.
Exactly. Right.
Make it 2 years old. Yeah.
Make it 2 years old, make it 1 year old. But I think that they're reading the live data and they're using that to make footprints of information gained, which then translates to the rest of the SERP.
Got it. Makes sense.
That's my hypothesis. Again, it's really changing quite quickly these days. So it's tough to really say, but I think if, again, this is all like if I were Google how would I be thinking about
those
this
things.
problem that we have? And I feel like that's like an interesting way to think about it. And I think they just had to scramble, and that's why they boosted the whole like UGC thing. And I think as SEO content creators, basically produce EEAT content with relevant information gain, I actually think that the whole forums and stuff are just going to be pushed down. I think they like literally exist because the SERPs are still like kind of filled with a bit too much junk. And so Google is just kind of saying, okay, this here is actually the most positive like user satisfaction path that we have. So our hands are tied.
Yeah. Do you think I'm guessing users still preference Reddit. So I wonder if like the click-through rate curve is still going to go towards Reddit, even if that's true. What are you saying? Do you think that?
I think
probably depends on the topic.
I think it depends on the topic. It depends on, what brands, like start to surface or rise or fall, right? It's like, currently I still trust NerdWallet if I'm like thinking about credit card stuff.
Yeah.
And that's because, they've built a brand on that, which is also why, a very other common theme that Google propaganda keeps alluding to is brand, right? They're just like, brand. And people are like, well, how do I measure brand? And I think, the way you kind of measure brand is probably what's called a navigational search. But, navigational search is like if you Googled vacuum cleaner and then you didn't find, say, Best Buy or Amazon. And then you have to go back and, Google vacuum cleaner Best Buy, right? And so that would be like a navigational search, which then Google could say, okay, well, vacuum cleaners without Best Buy in the SERP is a bad SERP because people will have to Google vacuum cleaner Best Buy. So that's like a brand signal, right?
Yeah, yeah. I am curious. You made me think earlier, this kind of, maybe a small tangent of, it must be interesting. I know Reddit's just skyrocketed in projected traffic, obviously actual traffic. Obviously, for a time, everyone would append Reddit best vacuum cleaner.
Right.
For those same reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
Has that kind of started to decline at all? I would be curious.
I bet it has.
Yeah.
Because Reddit is by default,
everywhere,
generally in the top 10 results.
Yeah. But it'll be interesting. I mean, yeah, you're making me want to go to some of these search results and actually like open 5 of them and be like, do these feel different for more than they have in the past? I don't know if is it too early for that kind of thing to be present, or
I think Google's
happen
continuing to test stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, basically, I feel like they're kind of in this like damned if I do, damned if I don't, right? Like, people are like, oh, like SERPs suck, and then they dial up the temperature essentially, and then you get like India Times like ranking for like benefits of drinking water, and it's just kind of maybe not so good of a result.
Yeah.
And people are like, like that sucks. And, it's just like, well, like, do you want 10 results that are all Mayo Clinic, WebMD, whatever? And then they're like, no, that sucks. And then you're like, okay, well, here's, 10 results that are like, Dr. Axe and like, these like more niche like bloggers and things.
Yeah.
Like, well, those aren't like trustworthy. And then, Google's like, well, okay.
That was like some Reddit person who's 13-year-old giving you health advice. And,
exactly. Yeah. And then you're like, yeah, like that sucks. And you're like, if you're Google, you're like, well, this is a very tough problem.
Yeah.
What do you expect?
I mean, we've riffed on this for a while. I'm like, realizing we're already at an hour here, but are you like, in hearing all these things, are you optimistic? Or I guess it's the definition of what optimism is. I don't know what you're rooting for. Maybe we start there. Yeah. What is, you said it's a big problem.
It's a big problem.
We might call this the future of SEO, this podcast. But how do you, you get where I'm going? Like, do you feel the results are going to be better? What does that mean for SEO? How is this change that we're talking about? It's all pretty Google focused.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't even touch on like the implication of Search GPT or we did sort of touch about ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the best way that I've reconciled it in my mind is that if we define the death of Google search as the idea that less and less people are going to search for things on Google, then I think that the death of Google search has been happening itself already for the last 20 years, right? We can say that, if you Google mortgage calculator in the past, Google sends you to mortgagecalculator.com. Today, you just get a widget, right? If you Google Austin weather, which I actually sometimes still do, in the past, they would send it to, theweatherchannel.com, /tx/Austin, and now I get the weather widget, right? So in that particular sense, yes, I no longer search for, say, stock tickers. I just go to my app that's like stock tickers. I no longer generally
Monopoly get broken up though, and
right. You got that. That's
another hour conversation.
So I would say that in that sense, yes, we are going to see the largest, or are seeing the largest cannibalization of searches where Google is no longer willing or wanting to send traffic. Lyric websites, celebrity net worth websites, Google's trying to answer that question for you. They're also trying to, do the flights. They're trying to do the hotels. They're trying to do everything and take a lot of that traffic for themselves. So yes, with AI overviews, I think it's the death of a lot of consensus like topics, like the what is, the historical things, everything that could have been a featured snippet is now, Google cannibalized and more. And Google's just going to take all of that. So I think that that's happening. That sucks. But people still need to search, right? Like I think, ChatGPT, Gemini, these kinds of things are designed to be really good for certain types of searches and activities, like plan me a 3-day itinerary that's, family friendly, indoors because, it's really hot in Texas, so on and so forth. ChatGPT or Gemini is just way better than a Google search for exactly that. However, you probably would search, like 3-day itinerary, Austin, Texas, and then, do some research. And then you might go to Gemini and say, like, plan me a that's not this, that focuses on that. Make sure to include Franklin's because, I want some barbecue, right? So it's sort of this like, even more fractured like ecosystem that we're going to get into. And so I think that the future of search is that it's still going to be there, but the amount of traffic that you can expect is going to dwindle significantly for head topics and consensus queries. And it's going to skew way more towards personable, relatable, experience-rich, perspective-driven content. Because, right, like I'm pretty sure Google is going to keep the AI overview and just keep tacking on. And that's going to really influence what somebody wants to click on below the fold, right? If I Google,
how does that maintain their ad model though?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
That's the catch-22 in my mind.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think it's described as the innovator's dilemma that if they don't start doing that, could they be disrupted essentially?
Yeah. I think they just have to offer it for free for a long time until they can basically be close to a monopoly.
Yeah, but then now we didn't touch on it. I joked about it a little bit, but that they just got cracked out. Who knows what that's going to mean? But in terms of maybe just YouTube will just get kind of cut off or something into its own entity.
Split into its own entity. Yeah. They're not allowed to buy their way to be default, search
video
for, Apple devices but I mean, when you actually think about it, like, it's like Google's played their cards so well, Like the Chrome, like it was just a crazy ploy to be the default search engine.
Yeah.
G Suite, Android, right?
Yeah.
Like they've basically been meticulous. And it's actually insane when you think about what they've done.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, I'm generally an optimist, so weirdly, I feel like this conversation is making me a little more optimistic of like a world where people are not criticizing Google search results, which almost seems like the future you're outlining is one that's positive for Google and therefore SEO in a way, in my guess. I don't think you're incorrect about some of the searches, but some of my head goes to, do we even want those searches? A lot of them.
No, I don't think we do. Yeah. Exactly. I don't think we do. And I think, a common question that we get is, okay, now that there are AI overviews, how do I qualify to be one of those citations? And, my main question is, the whole goal of that AI overview is to produce a zero-click. So, like, do you even want to be the citation? Obviously, I think you can argue it as like, okay, well, you get more, brand recognition and impressions and real estate, and that will then drive up CTRs for your perspective-driven content that lives below the fold. And so, yes, like in that way, it's indirectly. Plus, you're building confidence with Google's models that you are a authority on that particular topic, which is also good as well. But from a pure traffic perspective, being a citation is probably like very not valuable.
Yeah, agreed. Unless, and I mean, I'm curious it does seem like it's firing on everything, even like complex. What is topics? I think of B2B things, like can you truly get the meaning from that dense entity sentence?
Right.
Probably not.
Probably not. But that will influence what people want to click on below, right? Like,
based on what was said.
Exactly. If you Google, like, say, A/B testing or, user-generated content, maybe in the past it would be 10 results that are what is A/B testing. But, like if you Google A/B testing and now there's an AI overview that's like A/B testing is, the science of using statistical significance to blah, 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 blah. Then are you really going to click on what is A/B testing?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
As the position number one, you probably want to click on, pros and cons of A/B testing.
Tools.
Exactly. It's like, or my experience doing A/B testing and my results. You want to click. So I think that's going to really influence.
That's the meta.
Yeah, that's
decision tree to make.
Yeah.
The super advanced SEO be like, I don't want to do that definition.
Right. Yeah. You do the definition, you cram it full of entities, you recognize that the whole model is trying to promote, entity-rich passages that are very short. Yeah. And then you realize too that that's a whole different model. And then you play the perspective and EEAT game by then making, we A/B tested, 5
million posts.
Exactly. And here's what we found, right? Yeah. So then you actually locked both. That's like that's the meta that I'm like
the
envisioning.
A++ on Clearscope.
Right.
Nice. I think that's a great way to wrap it up, Bernard. This is awesome. Hopefully we'll be here in 10 years to have another conversation.
I think so. We'll be like, generative engine optimization specialist with entity rich.
It will be AI versions of us.
Right, exactly. It'll just be talking nonstop.
Awesome.